Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Grid Live Wrap-Up. We are counting down to the release of a 2025 Grid Ranking and Grid EPI, but in the meantime, we have a lot of racing to recap this weekend. I'm Ben Schneider from Grid Encore, in for Joe Samniego tonight, and with me is Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight and Tanner Smith from Pitbox Press. And before we get into our show, we want to give a big shout-out to our Patreon supporters, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. If you like what you see tonight and want to consider joining them, you can follow the link in the description box below to invest in us through Patreon. Or if you'd rather make a one-time contribution instead, we also appreciate Buy Me a Coffee contributions and YouTube super chats. Now, it was a wild weekend all across the board, but specifically in Australia for Formula One and Supercars, a wild and wet ending of the weekend, I guess I should say. A lot of rain down there in Melbourne, but we also had Marc Marquez and Ducati continuing their dominance in Argentina. IMSA's 12 Hours of Sebring ended with Porsche on top, but we are going to begin tonight's show with NASCAR in Las Vegas, and the driver with 100-1 odds entering the race today being the one that went to victory lane. And we're going to start our NASCAR recap right now. We'll say hi to Kobe a little bit later on in the show, but Tanner, good to see you again. Let's talk about Team Penske. Let's talk about the race as a whole, I guess I should say. Team Penske was the one that was strong in stage one. We had Joey Logano and Austin Cindric both up there. Cindric won the stage, and Kyle Larson won stage two, but it was Barry, as I mentioned, picking up the 101st win in the career of Wood Brothers Racing. This is Barry's first career win in the Cup Series, and with Harrison Burton's win at Daytona last year, it's the first time since Kyle Petty won a race in both 1986 and 87 that team has won races in back-to-back seasons. So right off the bat, Tanner, what's your reaction to Barry's victory? And between this race today and the P4 last week at Phoenix, are you surprised at how well he's run the last 2 weeks?
As far as the last 2 weeks, with Phoenix, no. So I made a point coming into the season that Josh Berry is going to have both Ryan Blaney and Joey Logano's data to go off of. So at those flatter tracks like Martinsville, Phoenix, places that Barry has been known to succeed in the past, especially with Martinsville, given his late model background, I was not surprised to see him perform well there. And Vegas, if you obviously look back into his Xfinity Series career, he had an exceptional fill-in stint there for Michael Annett back in 2021 in the one car for Junior Motorsports when he got his second career Xfinity Series victory. So it's a place that Barry has, I would imagine, a pretty good notebook on in terms of mentally and, kind of how to approach the track. So I guess in hindsight, no, we really shouldn't be too surprised that he was able to really show his strength this weekend and the weekend before. But at the same time, we've just not seen really any pace out of the Wood Brothers cars in many, many years, especially this consistently, like back-to-back weeks of just very, very strong runs from the Wood Brothers crew. And like I said, we just haven't seen that since Harrison Burton took over the car in 2022. And, I don't want this to turn into a Harrison Burton, flame session, but you really just got to tip your cap to the perseverance of that team. They obviously came into this year with a whole lot of a new driver, a relatively brand new crew chief, and they've really made things come together really fast. And I think the biggest thing that I'm pulling from this weekend is the fact that Ford, for once in the next gen era, has speed to start the year. And that really can't be overstated. They have been fast at almost every track, not at COTA, but they don't really have a whole lot of tremendous road racers on their current roster among their teams. But at the end of the day, I guess I was surprised that Barry was able to run so well today, considering his Penske teammates each had some form of trouble come in their way. But yeah, you really got to tip your cap to Barry and the Wood Brothers. They put in a phenomenal effort this weekend from qualifying on through the race. They stayed up front the entire event, got points in both stages. So this was not by any means a fluke victory. I hope that it's not swept away like it is one. Barry was fast all day, showed a lot of strength, and when the chips were down, he was really able to, play all of his cards and come out with a win. So great day for Wood Brothers, great day for NASCAR, any day that Wood Brothers wins. So like I said, my hat's off to them. I was surprised by their performance today, but maybe in retrospect, I shouldn't have been.
Tanner, I know we were talking backstage before the show, but just thinking back to Wood Brothers' recent history, like I said, it's the first time in 38 years that they had back-to-back winning seasons. But, in looking at their run-up to their 100th win, they got a win with Morgan Shepherd in 1993. Then they had to wait 8 years for Elliott Sadler to win at Bristol in 2001. Then it was almost a full decade before Trevor Bayne won the Daytona 500. Then another 6 years after 2011 when Ryan Blaney won Pocono in 2017. That got them to 99, and then it took them 7 years after that to win their 100th with Harrison Burton at Daytona last year in the summer race. So this knocking on the door for 100, so to speak, they were knocking on the door for years, decades really, when you think about it. And then as soon as they get 100, 16 races later, here we are in 2025, and Josh Berry takes them to victory lane in a mile and a half. So I don't know. Like you said, I like that you said it wasn't a fluke, because like we said, we saw speed with them at Phoenix last week. Another strong top 5 run. Barry's obviously a tremendous talent, and I think the drivers that run the weekly series, like Mike Joy was saying on the broadcast today, it wasn't that long ago that was Josh Berry, and we were all hoping he would get an opportunity in so much as an Xfinity ride with Junior Motorsports, and then that ultimately turned into a full-time deal there. Now he's full-time in Cup with the Wood Brothers, and certainly making the most of that opportunity there. So we'll see if they can continue this run of form that they've had the last couple of weeks, but certainly, I think trending in the right direction for that team, and for Ford as well to have the speed this early in the year, I think is a good sign for all of those teams. Looking at Christopher Bell now, he was, of course, trying to become the first Cup driver to win 4 in a row since Jimmy Johnson in 2007. He came up well short of that, also played a small part in that multi-car crash, moving up the track a little bit with 73 laps to go. He did come away with a 12th place finish and is still, for the 4th week in a row, the highest finishing Toyota. So not a good day for them results-wise on a weekend where they were showing speed. But were you surprised, Tanner, by the fact that he did have a relatively quiet afternoon, so to speak, given how hot he's been to start this season?
I was surprised by Joe Gibbs Racing's performance writ large today. They just did not show up, period. They did not produce a race-winning race car, which, when you come to the racetrack, you expect to see one of those 4 cars have a chance to win, if not multiple. So yeah, it was definitely a shock. I think that with how strong Christopher Bell has been in the fall races at Las Vegas, I think many, including myself, expected him to contend today, and he really was nowhere to be found for most of the race, whether it was not getting the screw tightened on the nut for your tire and having to go to your teammate's stall to get it refastened. They just kept encountering problems all day, it seemed. Then they obviously were one of those cars that I believe pitted with like Kyle Larson and William Byron before that final caution came out, and that really kind of sunk the rest of their race, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, you look at all of the Gibbs cars today, they were just complete non-factors. Chase Briscoe's tire doesn't get screwed on in the first stage, and he's going to have 2 crew members ejected for the next few weeks because of it. And he lost 4 laps, and something that was crucially missed on the Fox broadcast, he was able to get back on the lead lap, which was pretty impressive, if you ask me. I think he ended up powering back to the top 20, something like that, but he was never really a factor today. Ty Gibbs, I don't even want to get into it. He was nowhere to be found all day. Denny Hamlin, he got bit by pitting too early and got caught out by that last caution, which is unfortunate, especially after they were able to really work all day to get that car up into race-winning contention. And then obviously you have Bell, who just, I don't know, every time they got up front, something happened and they were just unable to really hold on to track position, which again is unfortunate, but it's one race. And to be fair, this race was just hectic, really. From lap 50 onward, it was a complete and utter crapshoot, which is pretty applicable when we're going to Las Vegas. So Yeah, was really surprised that Bell wasn't even a factor really at any point past when he got up to third via pit strategy. But at the end of the day, it's one race. I'm not really worried about their overall, look after this. I'm sure they'll pour over the data and figure out kind of where they went wrong, whether it be strategically or setup wise. It seemed like none of those cars really were set up great out of the box. So maybe they could use the back channel of that JGR 2311 alliance and take some notes from them coming back to Vegas in the fall, because 2311 cars were pretty strong today. Unfortunately, they didn't really get the finishes they really earned, but that's just how it goes sometimes.
Well, I'm going to take a page out of my Encore playbook here and improvise a little bit. This was the last follow-up I was going to ask you, but since you mentioned it a little bit, talking about Toyota overall, Ty Gibbs, like you mentioned, did not have a very good day. I know you said you didn't want to talk about it too much here, but I do have to ask. He was running worse than 30th at multiple points during this race, ended up with that weird incident where he spun into his pit box. They did be able to complete a legal stop because he had all four tires in the box, but was obviously facing the wrong way. So just not a very good day for him. He did ultimately gain a couple spots there at the end, finished 22nd. But do you think it's time for that 54 team to hit the panic button? We're 3 seasons, 2.5, I guess, in with Ty Gibbs and filling in 2022. But 2.5 years into his Cup career, you would have wanted to see some progression by now. It looks like there's been regression to start 2025. Is it time to hit the panic button on that 54 team?
I think if they come out of the first 9 races and things don't get better, it might be time to hit the panic button. But we're only on race 5. Like, we got to pump the brakes a little bit. I know that they have a new crew chief over there on the 54 car, and I've got to imagine that's got something to do with their performance thus far this season. Obviously, you would love for them to have looked better to this point, especially with how poorly they ended last season. But at the end of the day, they are clearly a rebuilding race team. And once these teams really start to get their footing underneath them going throughout this season, which, like I said, will take about 9 races to really know what these teams actually look like, I wouldn't hit the panic button just yet, but Talladega is getting closer. So that ninth race is approaching, and yeah, the returns thus far have just not been good at all. Like this, you really couldn't telegraph a bigger disaster for one of the JGR cars to start this season. Really, both of the 19 and the 54 have just had a real uphill battle set in front of them every single race. So yeah, not hitting the panic button yet on Ty Gibbs on my end, but I can definitely see why people would. I just think that with all the new happening in JGR totally, with Gabe Hart moving up to comp director, the 11 having a new crew chief, and the 54 having a new crew chief, growing pains are going to happen, especially early in the season. So my advice would be, if you are overreacting to the 54's lack of performance thus far, I would recommend that you pump the brakes, take a breath, give it a little bit more time. But like I said, if we reach the quarter point of the season and they have not improved, like, just get a top 10. Just get a top 10. That would be great. But yeah, they're definitely digging themselves quite a hole in the points that can always be wiped away and, shoveled back in with a win. But definitely would like to see that team pick up the pace going forward.
Yeah, you can certainly ask the previous Wood Brothers driver, Harrison Burton, how that works. Obviously, not a great season for him last year, but he won Daytona. That's all you need to get into the playoffs. So still plenty of time for Ty Gibbs to grab a win and lock up his playoff spot, or maybe even just turn the form around and try to claw out of that points hole with a string of good finishes. Sometimes just one top 10, maybe that'll be all it takes to turn the momentum around for him, but plenty of time nonetheless. Let's talk about Trackhouse. Good day overall for that team. Daniel Suarez in second, Ross Chastain in fifth. Not a good afternoon, however, for their rookie driver, and still feels weird to call SVG a rookie, but in the Cup Series he is. Shane Van Gisbergen did not have a very good day, although his team put 2 cars in the top 5 for the first time in over 2 years. He was in a much different situation today. Had to settle for 34th place following a trio of incidents, a spin and then a flat tire, and then hitting the wall for a third time. That one ultimately forced him behind the wall into the garage area and ended his afternoon. So, Tanner, he had a strong run at COTA. I think that was to be expected. Of course, he almost won the Xfinity race there last year, but looking at the ovals, it has been a slow start to the season for him. Are you surprised by that, or is this something we should have expected given how radically different this is from what he's used to in supercars and how competitive the Cup Series is?
I feel like I need to remind folks that I was called a hater less than 2 weeks ago for saying that he would struggle at Phoenix, which I don't think that was really in his hands at that point, given that everybody just crashed in front of him. So I kind of give him a bit of a pass for Phoenix because, like I said, you can't really handle when the track's practically blocked by either braking or wrecked cars. So I'm giving him a little bit of a pass for last week, but this week, I think his team kind of let him down, and I'm going to explain why. It seemed like every blowout that SVG had this past weekend came from the right front. Every single one of them. All three. And that almost always tells me that that's a setup issue. And clearly the 99 and the 1 did not share that setup. So they ended up looking really good. Now, as far as SVG is concerned and like his overall performance to this point, I'm really not that shocked. I am a little shocked at like the circumstances, obviously, considering, Phoenix, he didn't really get a fair shake because he got wadded up in that crash. This week didn't really have a chance to actually compete with anybody because he kept blowing tires, which again, more of a setup issue. So, I mean, I'm a little disappointed with the results, but I also recognize that it's not really his fault entirely that they are where they are. At the same time, though, you really want to give your young driver, and I say that because he's, 35, 36 years old, but he's newish to the Cup Series. You want to make sure that they're getting enough track time with an undamaged race car to really really hone their skills on these kind of tracks where, SVG hasn't really run a Cup car very much. And unfortunately, Trackhouse is not really putting him in the best position week in and week out to have those laps on the track to really hone those skills. So I think that races like today and races like last week are really going to hold him back from, becoming as great as he could be this season. But again, it's kind of like with Ty Gibbs. We're in race 5. We've got to make sure we're pumping the brakes, not spewing too many hot takes this time of year because they always come back to bite you. So yeah, I'm a little surprised by the results, the performances, especially in qualifying. No one should be surprised by, but the last 2 weeks, I'm not really going to put it on the driver's hands, considering that, again, last week, big pile up, it blocked the track. He didn't really have anywhere to go. And this week, it was clearly a setup issue causing his woes. So, yeah, it's disappointing, but it's week 5. Just got to make sure that we keep that into perspective.
All right, we'll leave it there. Of course, the train keeps rolling on here. We've got Homestead coming up next week. All 3 of the National Touring Series will be there, so we'll keep our eye on how things continue to develop. Of course, some teams looking to continue to ride that wave of momentum. Other teams looking to turn their season around. We'll bring that here to you all right here next week on the wrap-up show. In the meantime, I believe Kobe is back, ready to recap a wild Australian Grand Prix here. So, Kobe, take it away.
Yeah, what an Australian Grand Prix it was late last night or early this morning, depending on where you were in the world. Definitely what I consider a classic Formula One Grand Prix race. As a wet and wild Australian Grand Prix saw the race truly test all 20 drivers on the grid. Mistakes were made by rookies. Past world champions like Fernando Alonso in trouble, and McLaren nearly threw the race away as Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri went sliding off the track into the grass at the same time. But Norris was able to recover from that and hold Max Verstappen with the assistance of DRS off for the final 2 laps. Norris starts the new season leading the Drivers' Championship, but he really had to earn this one, work hard for it. He also had some assistance from Mercedes team. I mean, from McLaren's team order. Sorry about that. With them telling Piastri to hold position and not overtake when they were running 1-2. Piastri's day was ruined when he spun and nearly got stuck in the grass when both McLarens went off on a wet track. And starting with you, Ben, despite the early pace, are you convinced that Lando Norris can hold off his teammate Piastri and Red Bull's Max Verstappen all season?
I think he can. I think the pace is there. I'm just not convinced that he's going to be as mistake-free as I expect Max Verstappen to be, and that is going to be Verstappen's opportunity to capitalize here. Now, I know Max also made a mistake. All three of the top three, I say that. I know Piastri didn't finish in the top three, but all three of the three cars that we expected to be up there fighting for those podium spots made some sort of mistake. Obviously, the two McLarens went off together. I know there was another period where Max went off as well, but I think that's really what we saw last year, right? When we got to the second half of the season, it was clear McLaren had the dominant car, and even Ferrari seemed like on their best weekend they could take the fight to Red Bull. But Max, A, had such a big gap built up, and B, was just still as consistent and as strong as he is as a driver, was able to hold on to that championship lead. Whereas Lando, I mean, how many times do we talk about him taking pole position and then bottling it on lap one or giving up the lead and losing a position on lap one, even if he wasn't on pole position? It seemed like sometimes he would continue to drop spots on the starts, and that just kind of set him kind of behind the eight ball, so to speak, and have to work his way back up through the race. Max Verstappen rarely, if ever, does that. So if McLaren, I think, have the car. They absolutely have the car that can give Lando Norris or maybe even Oscar Piastri a shot at fighting for a World Drivers' Championship. And I would still say they're probably my picks to win the Constructors again this year. But Max Verstappen does not make those kinds of mistakes, like I said. So if Lando can take this momentum and carry it throughout the season and be perfect, I think that's what it's going to take to beat Max Verstappen over the course of a full season. So can he do it? Absolutely. Will he do it? I want to see more than just one race. And like I said, he even made a mistake in this race. He was lucky to get away with it. His teammate Oscar Piastri did not. But I think that if he can continue this form and be mistake-free, he absolutely has a shot at taking the fight to them all season long.
I think that we're going to find out one way or another if Lando Norris is truly a championship caliber driver, which has been a very big conversation on social media since his meteoric rise last season. I don't know exactly where I fall in that camp. I don't think I've seen enough of Lando, contending for wins just yet to really crown him in that way and say that, yes, this is a championship caliber driver. But what I will say is that yesterday's race, or today's, whichever, the race in Australia, it displayed that Lando has definitely matured as a driver. I feel like when he was earlier in his career, he would get into these kinds of situations where he would be leading a race and just bottle it one way or another. And to see him fend off the challenge from his teammate, which, obviously Piastri had his own exceptionally weird issue happen as they were trying to dive onto pit road there with those slick tires when it randomly got wet. I also recognize that yesterday's race is not really a true barometer of how this season's going to go, how each weekend's going to play out. And I can't really say for certain whether McLaren has like the raw pace to kind of slash out that Verstappen edge that he has on the competition right now. But at the same time, I can say that Lando Norris showed me a lot of maturity and discipline in that drive that I feel like I haven't seen from him, throughout his entire career. So I lean towards saying that Lando's definitely showing that he can be a championship caliber driver with that drive that he had yesterday, but it was such a weird race with a lot of insane circumstances happening that I really can't say that it's a true barometer of what we'll see throughout the rest of the season. So I guess I'll reserve my judgment for probably like week 4.
And before I get into my answer, I want to say post-race technical inspection is complete in Las Vegas, and Josh Berry and the Wood Brothers are officially your race winners. So anyone worried about, any DQs up there, don't have to worry anymore because Josh Berry is now a first-time winner in the NASCAR Cup Series. And getting back to Formula One, I have to agree with what you said down about Lando Norris. I truly believe that he has grown up a lot as a driver because the Lando Norris from early last season, year before that, with Max Verstappen chasing him like that, he probably would have ended up, throwing the race away right there. And for him to hold off Max Verstappen in those circumstances, because at one point in like the final 10 laps or so, I was like, yeah, it looked like Lando had this in the bag unless something happened. Then all of a sudden, Max Verstappen is coming and coming and coming. And I think if Max Verstappen had maybe just 1, 2, even 3 more laps, he might have gotten there. But luckily, Lando was coming to the checker flag, ended up taking the race victory. And I also agree that we're probably going to have to get a few races in, obviously, since this was the very first one, to see where they all stack up and if Lando Norris and McLaren are truly going to be world championship contenders this year. But getting a win in Melbourne, Australia, definitely a great start to his 2025 season for him and McLaren. And the biggest challenge that was discussed on the F1 pre-race show was the transition and changing track conditions from rain to no rain, back to rain. 6 cars retired from the race. Isaac Hadjar crashed out on the formation lap, and he was absolutely devastated. If you saw, with all the camera shots that we saw, he was super emotional and appeared to be crying. But Anthony Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's dad, went over to Hadjar and consoled him. We also saw additional mistakes from drivers like Carlos Sainz, both McLaren drivers, as I've already mentioned, Charles Leclerc and Liam Lawson. Tanner, were you surprised by the number of mistakes we saw from the drivers?
Yes and no. I don't think that I've watched an F1 race live that was featuring such a track so saturated as Albert Park yesterday. I just felt like the rain tire just didn't really have a whole lot of grip on that racetrack for whatever reason. And, a lot of people, especially with the Sainz incident, kind of pointed to the painted bike lanes that they have on the track, because obviously this takes place in a park. So with that will come extra painted lines that normal street circuits wouldn't really have. And, we don't obviously see a whole lot of rain at Albert Park this time of year. I can't remember the last time that we kicked off a season with rain, to be honest with you. But at the same time, I don't think any driver should feel too down in the dumps about yesterday. I mean, we saw champions of the sport and Fernando Alonso have just a horrific time out there. We saw, Lewis Hamilton make a few mistakes. We saw Max Verstappen almost Bennett going into the back half of the course while he was on rain tires. So I feel like pretty much everybody had a problem with the track yesterday at one point or another. I mean, even the race winner almost completely bottled his race as the rain started to come down there around lap 45. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I wasn't really surprised considering how saturated the track was. And I just feel like I hope that someone like Hadjar is not really raking himself over the coals after we saw so many drivers Bennett yesterday in so many different ways, just because the conditions were just too wet. Even the guy that's in his, team's A team, their new driver wiped out yesterday. So I don't think anybody that had a problem in the race really has anything to be ashamed about. Those conditions were absolutely absurd. And I was kind of surprised that they didn't try to throw the red when they could see that guys were spinning out during the formation lap. But it is F1 and, the pressure is always on. So, I hope that none of these drivers really feel like they have to look over their shoulder after such a very challenging weekend for all 20 drivers on the grid.
Yeah, well, I also just want to say shame on Helmut Marko for the comments that he made about Isaac Hadjar and saying that it was embarrassing seeing the tears rolling down his face. I mean, even if that is true, which I don't think it is, Tanner, like you were saying, I don't think any of the rookies especially have anything to be ashamed of. It was a dreadful racetrack out there with the conditions, but certain things just don't need to be said, specifically from somebody so high up in your race team. And I don't know what he is. I mean, he said it a couple of years ago with Checo waking up from his world championship dream. I mean, of course, we all knew that, it was going to be very difficult for him to take the fight to Max. But what do you gain? What is your team gain? What does your driver gain from having you come out and make comments like that? It's just absolutely ridiculous. And I think he showed his true colors once again this weekend. But getting back to the drivers themselves and the race itself, I can't say I'm too surprised. Like I just said, the conditions out there were absolutely terrible. We're going to get into supercars here in just a little bit. They had to scrap their last race of the weekend. Formula 2 had to scrap their feature race entirely. And then we had a wet racetrack, then it dried out, and then we had more rain come back, and nobody knew how long the rain was going to last exactly. And we had multiple different strategies out there. I mean, it was just a very chaotic race with a lot going on, a lot to keep track of. And then you throw these rookies out there, for some of them, their first ever race. I mean, like Kimi Antonelli might be driver of the day. I know Lando obviously got it, I think, because of starting on pole and winning the race and everything, and being kind of the crowd favorite. And obviously Oscar Piastri had the home crowd backing him. But what a job he did to finish up there in the top 5. But for the rest of the rookies, obviously a very difficult, very challenging day. A lot of them crashing out or spinning out at the very least. I can't say I'm too surprised. And Tanner, like you said, I don't think we can really hold it against them all that much, given how treacherous the conditions were. So, and like I said, it wasn't only the rookies. You had world champions out there that were doing the same thing. I mean, Fernando Alonso, they joke that he's a rookie, right? He seems to be the ageless wonder, but he is a 2-time world champion of his sport, and he was out there struggling and ultimately had his day end prematurely as well. So it wasn't just them. It was very difficult for everybody out there.
Yeah, definitely a difficult day for not just the rookies, but as you said, Ben, everyone out there. I don't think the rookies have too much to be ashamed of, because, it happens to the best of them. You could put any driver from any series out there, regardless of what it was, whether it was Formula One's supercars. I know the Porsches were there, but the Porsche Carrera Cup Series in Australia, regardless of what series you put out there at racetrack, I'm sure there would be a struggle for everyone. So I wouldn't beat myself up if I were them. But I have to agree with you in comment about Helmut Marko, Ben. I just don't understand why he would make a comment like that. But actually I do, because that's just the type of person that he is. You remember, this is the same guy when COVID happened a few years ago, that he said that we should have COVID parties so everybody can become infected and gain immunity. So anyone who says something like that, you pretty much know who they are. Once a person shows you who they are, but believe you. And that's basically who Helmut Marko is. You wanted to say something?
If Marco came out and said the sky was blue, I would be convinced it was purple. I don't take anything that man says seriously anymore. So that's just, like you said, Kobe, I guess this is just par for the course here. But I wish, kicking your own drivers while they're down is one hell of a strategy. So I hope he's happy with himself. But it's just ridiculous.
He probably thinks Jos Verstappen is a fantastic father. So yeah, that really says it all.
Yeah, if he's talking about Isaac Hadjar like this, if Liam Lawson, I know this is just one round for Liam. I know not so good in qualifying. Didn't really move forward much in the race. Yeah. If Liam Lawson continues to basically do what Checo Perez did last season, I hate to hear what Helmut Marko's gonna say about Liam. I really hope Liam can prove us all wrong in this second Red Bull. See, I know it's just one race, but after seeing what I saw in Australia, I'm starting to get a little concerned about Liam, but hopefully he'll prove us all wrong. I know here at the Grit Network, across our programs, we've kind of alluded to that this second Red Bull seat seems to be cursed, and hopefully Liam put a bad race weekend behind him and move forward, because if this is a sign of things to come, we might be having another round of musical chairs at Red Bull Racing.
Yeah, I think Yuki might be in the car by Miami if the weekends keep going how they did, because he had a great weekend. Obviously, Liam Lawson did not.
Yeah. At one point, Yuki was running as high as 5th place, but unfortunately, no strategy in the end kind of derailed him, and he ended up finishing outside of the points. And even Helmut Marko himself actually praised Yuki, believe it or not, which kind of surprised me. Trashed Hadjar and praised Yuki, and said that, and he admitted Yuki did nothing wrong, although the result does not show how well he performed in the race. He said, sometimes the strategy just don't work out, and it just didn't work out. And it would be nice if Yuki ended up getting, that Red Bull seat at some point, but, not going to wish any ill will on Liam Lawson here. And Ben, I believe you even said at this point, I think it was yesterday on the pre-race show, you made a comment about this. And did you say that Liam Lawson would be replaced before Colapinto, or do I have that mixed up?
Well, before Doohan coming in,
Oh
or
yeah.
Colapinto coming in to replace Jack Doohan, yeah.
Oh,
But I said that at the rate this is going, like the comment I just made about, I don't know if Miami's probably a little early, although I don't know. Danny Kvyat got a podium and then wiped out Sebastian Vettel in 2016, and they were very quick to make the switch at round 5 for Verstappen to come in, and then he won the race when they got to Spain. So you just never know in the sport. It seems like at Red Bull especially, they play musical chairs. We've seen it with Gasly and Albon and Danny Kvyat, obviously, and all sorts of drivers just in the last decade here. So it's going to be interesting to follow. Again, like you said, Kobe, wishing no ill will on Liam Lawson, but I still kind of struggle to wrap my brain around. I think Zach Brown even alluded to it this weekend. The strange driver choices that they make. You have somebody who has 4 years of experience in your junior team or your sister team or whatever you want to call, whatever they're called, AlphaTauri, Red Bull, RB, Racing Bulls, Minardi, Toro Rosso, whatever that team is these days. 4 years of experience there for a guy who really only has half a season in Liam Lawson. I know Lawson has a lot of potential, and I don't want to take anything away from him, but the fact that he was the one that got promoted to that seat after it became clear the Checo Perez situation was becoming untenable. I don't know what more Yuki can do at this point to take that seat. And I think, Matthew Bro, I think, was saying in our chat, if it was anybody else, maybe we would see a mid-season swap, but maybe there's something about the Red Bull team not wanting Yuki in that top seat. I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting situation to follow. But like you said, Kobe, I think that second seat is just cursed.
Yeah, for sure. And one last thing, a helmet marker before we move on. He also said that Gabriel Bortoleto was a B-rated driver, which has become very controversial there. And Bortoleto, I was reading what he said about it. He said that he hopes to prove Marco wrong and make sure he regrets those comments. So that'll be something we'll be following throughout the year. See how Gabriel Bortoleto does in his rookie season in Formula One.
And he said Doohan was a C-rated driver too, right? You also made those comments.
I didn't see that part, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah. It's just weird, like we've been saying, as with all the strange driver decisions that they've been making, and he feels like he's entitled to say someone is a B-rated driver, C-rated driver. How about he's F-rated at picking at his driver choices? Because I just don't understand what they're doing at Red Bull, and it would not surprise me later on in the year if we're talking about another Red Bull mid-season driver change.
Yeah, I've got the direct quote here from Planet F1. He is a C-grade driver. I don't think he will complete the season. That was Marco talking about a guy who spent 4 years as a part of a Red Bull Junior program. So, I mean, again, just a senile old man that should not be taken seriously. I think that sums up Helmut Marco pretty well.
The Bernie Ecclestone zone.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Basically, I guess we'll leave it at that. And now looking at a team that did not have a good day, it was Scuderia Ferrari, and when it looked like strategy and luck might work out, it didn't. 8th and 10th place finishes for Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, and leaving Australia, Ferrari is 7th in the constructors' standings behind Kick Sauber, Aston Martin, Williams, Red Bull, Mercedes, and of course McLaren. Ben, how big of a disappointment is this Ferrari, especially with all of the hype entering the season? With Charles Leclerc obviously returning, Lewis Hamilton finally driving for the prancing horse in red, and and then the preseason they felt very confident about their car, and this is how the opening weekend ended.
Kobe, it was so bad I had to go back and edit my Stephen A. Smith's Cowboys accident waiting to happen Ferrari remix video and update it for 2025. And I don't know, maybe I'll put that on my channel here in the next couple of days. But 8th and 10th place for your two drivers, I think, world championship caliber talents. I know Leclerc doesn't have any championships, but I think he has the talent to do so. Ferrari just have never given him the car. We know Lewis Hamilton is obviously a world-class driver. Obviously, we thought it would take him a little bit of time to get used to a new environment, but I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't expecting them to be as far down as 7th and 8th place in qualifying and then 8th and 10th in the race. And I thought they had a shot to maybe steal one. I don't know if they were going to win the race, but I thought they could have at least gotten one of their drivers on the podium. I would have loved to have seen them stay out under the safety car conditions as the rain was potentially easing a little bit on those dry tire compounds. I thought maybe they had a chance to play some strategy. I think that the booth was saying it pretty well. David Croft, Martin Breno, I forget exactly which one it was, but one of them was saying, look, you've already committed to this part of a strategy. If you come into the pits now and put the inners on, you've just basically admitted defeat and made it very difficult for yourself to recover and gain any points. They did ultimately get back to 8th and 10th, although it was 8th and 9th, and I think Piastri had a brilliant move on the last lap to get around Sir Lewis Hamilton there. So, obviously very unfortunate for them. I'm sure they would have liked to have started the season off much stronger than they did here. But I think we've got 4 very good teams in the sport right now. McLaren's very strong. Red Bull, obviously, one of their drivers, one of their cars at the very least, is going to still be in contention for a world championship. And Mercedes had a good weekend here as well. So there's a lot of competition at the front of the F1 grid right now. But I think Ferrari should be right there. They certainly have the talent behind the wheel with each of their 2 drivers. So to only come away with 8th and 10th place and be 7th in the constructor standings, massive disappointment for sure.
Yeah, as someone that's followed Lewis Hamilton's entire career in Formula One, this was definitely not the ringing endorsement for this move that I hoped it was going to be. Last week, I obviously selected him as my pick a winner for this weekend, and that obviously did not come to fruition. And yeah, it's one of those things where I kind of mentioned it earlier. I feel like this race was such an outlier in terms of how much the weather affected it that I don't think there's really much you can glean from it in terms of overall data on how the season's going to go. But I'm not going to lie to you, it was pretty sour watching Hamilton and a Ferrari just sit behind, I believe it was Alex Albon for like what seemed like 15 laps in last night's race and just not be able to pass him. And I don't know if that had to do with how well that car was taking the 3rd sector or what, but it just seemed like Ferrari was lacking in that 3rd sector the entire weekend. I remember Leclerc and Hamilton both put up like really good 1st and 2nd sectors on Saturday when they were qualifying, but something about that 3rd sector just kept taking them out of the mix and obviously led to them not having very good grid slots for the big race on Sunday. So yeah, it was definitely not the start that the Tifosi wanted to see happen, I would imagine. But at the end of the weekend, they came out of all of it with clean race cars and didn't find themselves in a crash of any kind. And outside of just lacking pace in that 3rd sector, I feel like they had, the building blocks to good speed at other tracks. So I think we'll just kind of have to see how they rebound from all of this. Maybe they just completely missed the mark this year when it came to their setup for this weekend. But yeah, that 3rd sector just seemed to get them all weekend. And because of that, if you don't really have a good run through the 3rd sector, you can't really get a good DRS draft going down the main straight and make a pass going into turn 1. So yeah, definitely got to look at that 3rd sector if you're Ferrari just to see like what the principles of it are that were making you so slow through it consistently and kind of go from there. So yeah, not the best start for Ferrari, but we've got many weeks to go.
Yeah, for sure. And what a difference a year makes, right? Because last year's Australian Grand Prix, Ferrari had a 1-2 with Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc, and then you flash forward to 1 year later, and they're nowhere near what they were in this race last year. So definitely a big disappointment for Ferrari. But like you say, Tanner, there's still many race weekends left to go, and Ferrari can right the ship, and we can see some potential in this car. But for the open and active Lewis Hamilton at Ferrari, definitely not how he wanted this to go at all. And it's interesting to see, how they're going to figure out, each other as the season goes on, and the chemistry even over the radio. I saw Lewis Hamilton, getting frustrated with his engineer, and even Charles Leclerc was getting frustrated with the team as well because they just kept talking, and they basically did, the leave me alone thing, like shut up, I'm just trying to focus and drive. So there's still some issues to iron out there, and then we already know what Ferrari's strategy is. I don't need to go into that. And this was basically another case of that, of why Ferrari, was put back there, and not able to show what they really could have shown at Albert Park. And now,
Kobe, before we move on, I want to read some communications between Leclerc and his engineer this weekend. So he asks, is there a leakage? And the engineer comes back and says, a leakage of what? And he says, I have a seat full of water, like a lot of water. The engineer says, must be the water. Leclerc comes back and says, I'll add that to the words of wisdom. So if that isn't Ferrari communications and strategy in a nutshell, I don't know what is.
They just need to stop micromanaging their drivers. Like, these guys obviously raised themselves into, in one case, the greatest driver statistically in Formula One history. And then the other one you all have practically raised into being, a race-winning championship caliber F1 driver. Trust that the drivers know what they're doing and let them race and shut up. Like, if they tell you to back off once, that's all it needs to be said. But no, they just kept micromanaging their drivers. And honestly, it was pretty embarrassing considering where they ended up finishing. So if I had to give Ferrari a bit of advice, it would be to just stay off the radio.
Yeah, definitely. And only give information as needed, not talking, and tell the drivers wish they had a mute button, so they wouldn't have to hear what you were saying. And overall, the race was a disappointment for some, like Ferrari, but jubilation for others. Alex Albon got a 5th place finish for Williams after Kimi Antonelli had his 4th place result restored when his penalty was overturned. 5 of the top 6 finishers were powered by Mercedes engines, so a great day if you're powered by the Silver Arrows. Lance Stroll, Nico Hülkenberg, they end up surviving all the chaos and carnage to finish the race in the points. Tanner, which one of those surprise results is the most promising to continue impressing next weekend in China?
I'm gonna go out on a limb and say Williams. I think that they showed a lot of pace in practice and qualifying, and obviously Sainz had his problem on that first lap in the final turn, which is just so crushing. Like, you spend all off season dreaming about finishing that first lap, and he could not do it because of the rain and just hitting one of the worst random spots on the track that they could have possibly had there towards the end of the lap. So unfortunate for Sainz to not really finish off the weekend with the backing up of a great qualifying run that he had and a great practice that he had this past week. But you really got to tip your cap to Alex Albon and the Williams team. They have been in partnership there for a little while, and it's really starting to bear fruit, which is really nice to see. Obviously, Williams, being one of the premier teams of the 1990s, showed a lot of pace for what feels like the first time in forever in both cars. And I think now that they have 2 drivers that I think are caliber of winning an F1 race and, really competing, I think it'll only elevate that program going forward. And I just feel like of the drivers that had a great run, it'll be the easiest for them to build off of because, Kimi Antonelli's never really had an F1 race prior to this one. So him getting 4th might make him think, oh, this stuff's really easy. And as we've seen over the years, that's really just not the case. So I definitely lean towards Williams having a really great day in China next week, or I should say whenever that race ends up happening. But yeah, really impressed by Albon's performance and with Sainz prior to the race. So I definitely lean towards them having continued momentum going into the next race.
Yeah, I think that's the obvious answer here, actually. I think Williams has a very strong driver lineup with Albon and Sainz. It was unfortunate what happened to Carlos this weekend, but hopefully he can bounce back. But I think Albon's always have a talent behind the wheel. You might not have seen it at that cursed second Red Bull seat as much, but since he's gotten to Williams, I think he's really kind of punched above his weight, so to speak. I think the Williams team has struggled to be competitive in recent years, as we've all seen, and Albon has been able to turn those situations into point-scoring opportunities from time to time. So for him to come out and get a 5th place finish, I think is a tremendous result for him. And I will tell you, looking at these other names here, Lance Stroll up in 6th, it's a good result for him, and credit to him for keeping the car on the track when his World Championship teammate even was struggling there. But I feel like we've yet to see it, over the course of a full season with Lance, the ability to run consistently up in the points and bringing home good results for a team. So I don't expect him to be there. I'm not going to wish any ill will on him or anything, but I don't expect that to be a weekly occurrence. And similarly for Nico Hülkenberg, And the Sauber team, I think, like the pre-race team was talking about this weekend, it's kind of a lame duck year for them before Audi comes in next year. I think they're really going to struggle to score points throughout the year. This weekend was obviously very chaotic, and Hülkenberg was able to take advantage of that. But I think that's kind of more of a one-off. I think Williams has the best chance out of all of them at making this a more regular occurrence starting in China next weekend.
Yeah, and I'd also like to credit the Williams team principal James Vowles, for coming in and rebuilding this team, because taking one of the worst teams on the grid and putting them where they are right now, just absolutely magnificent work by him and everyone at Williams. And I also got to give credit to our own Joshua Birch, who said after watching preseason testing, he said the one team that you're gonna have to watch who made the most improvement over the offseason based on what he could tell was Williams, and it looks like he ended up being right on that. And Carlos Sainz, Alex Albon, think they got a really strong driver lineup, and looking forward to seeing what they can do throughout the 2025 season. But it looks like this Williams team might be for real this year. I don't know if they're going to win a race. I think you probably have to, have a really wild race, kind of like we saw in Australia, for something like that to happen. But who knows? But if I'm Williams right now, I'd be very happy with where the program is going, especially where they've been, in the last handful of years or so. And got to give a call to Kimi Antonelli as well, given those conditions. I know he did make like a mistake during the race and all that, but ended up putting it behind him and got a solid result right there behind his teammate George Russell. And I'll be honest, Ben. I know, following Kimi Antonelli's career, at almost every level of racing, he went out there and blew the doors. Well, not in his case, since it's open wheel, but basically he dominated the competition at every single level, and people kept saying that this is the next great driver who's going to become a multi-time Formula One world champion someday. And then he did so great in the junior categories, he skipped F3 altogether and he went to Formula 2. And Ben, I know you on the Encore show, you talked a lot about him and how he didn't really set the world on fire in Formula 2. But McLaren, they really did not want to let Kimi Antonelli get away to another team, and they really wanted to put him in Formula 1 this year. And I'll be honest, I thought they kind of rushed him way too soon. I thought he should have been in F3, and this year he should have been going into F2, and then next year he should be going into Formula 1. But they decided to move him into F2, and he didn't really set the world on fire, so to speak. But he still had respectable runs throughout the season. So when they announced that he replaced Lewis Hamilton at Mercedes, I'm thinking maybe it's a little too soon. And then you remember Monza, his home race, the Italian Grand Prix FP1, went out and crashed the car, and I'm thinking, yeah, this is probably gonna have been a mistake. And then we saw had poor qualifying session, didn't even make it out of Q1. And then I'm thinking, oh boy, I said, Kimi Antonelli, is this gonna be the story of the season where he's going to really struggle to find his footing in Formula 1? Then the drive he put in throughout this race, coming through the field to get a top 5 finish in his very first Formula 1 race. Okay, I'm buying the hype a little bit, but that's just one race. We're gonna have to see how the rest of the season goes. But I definitely believe Antonelli deserves a lot of credit for a really, really strong performance in his F1 debut. Looking forward to seeing how he grows as a driver throughout the remainder of the season. And if we don't have anything else to add with Formula 1 there, I believe we'll switch over to this weekend's major endurance race.
Thank you, Kobe. Yes, let's talk about another edition here of the IMSA 12 Hours of Sebring, the Mobil 1 12 Hours of Sebring, I should say, for the WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. It's in the books now. It wasn't a crazy and chaotic race like we've seen in recent years, but that doesn't mean we don't have plenty to talk about. After ending last season as GTP champions, Porsche Penske Motorsport, specifically the number 7 Porsche, their championship winning season has carried over into this year with a dream start so far in 2025. Following a big win in the season opening Rolex 24 at Daytona, the number 7 Porsche followed up with the overall win at Sebring, so it gives them back-to-back wins to kick off 2025, a 1-2 finish for both Porsche Penske GTPs, and they swept the 36 Hours of Florida, 24 Daytona, now 12 here at Sebring. Felipe Nasser, Nick Tandy, and Lawrence Vanthoor took the top step of the podium over teammates Matthew Jaminet, Matt Campbell, and Kevin Estre in the sister car with the number 93 Meyershank Racing Acura of Ringer van der Zande, Nick Yellowly, and Alex Palou rounding out the overall podium. And we'll bring Kobe back in here to get his reaction to this. With Kobe, with Porsche Penske Motorsport kicking off the year with back-to-back wins at Daytona and Sebring, should the other GTP manufacturers be concerned at this point of the season already with them potentially running away with this championship?
For the second time this year in IMSA, dare I say, Penske perfect, right? Because you couldn't have dreamed a better start to the 2025 season for Roger Penske's factory Porsche GTP program. It's been amazing to see what this team has been able to do. I remember when the Porsche GTP first come online, they had their growing pains, obviously, and now it seems like that they are the gold standard of this class. Like, if you want to go out there and win each race weekend in GTP, that this is the team that you're going to have to go out there and beat. Sometimes we see a championship hangover, but we haven't seen this at all from this Porsche Penske Motorsport club. They've been hitting on all cylinders and executing the race perfectly. They did that Daytona for all 24 hours, and they did that all 12 hours at Sebring. They were always in a mix, and it was just a performance. It was just totally perfect out there, and they really did not put a wheel wrong at all. So huge credit to the number 7 and the number 16. I think they're going to be really, really hard to beat. But the only thing that the other GTP manufacturer are going to be hoping for or is that dreaded 3-letter word. Well, actually dreaded for Porsche Penske Motorsport, but not for the other manufacturers, is balance of performance. Yeah, after these races in, IMSA will crunch the data, and if they feel like Porsche might have a little bit of an advantage, they'll decide we may need to peg them back and may need to give this manufacturer some more power or take off some weight. So I don't think Porsche Penske Motorsport is going to have a 100% winning percentage all season long between those two cars, but I think they're probably going to be slower when they get to Long Beach, and some of the other manufacturers are going to be back in the fight.
Well, with Sebring over, it's now been 2 full years since we've seen Action Express Racing's number 31 team, the Wheel and Engineering Cadillac, in victory lane. Their last overall win was at the 12 Hours of Sebring 2 years ago in 2023. That year, Sebring was their only win of the season, and then they went winless in 2024. Many have been wondering when Action Express would get back to the top step of the IMSA podium. While Porsche Penske Motorsport might have had the edge this year at Sebring, we saw Action Express leading the race at various points, although they did fade back to 4th place at the end. Jack Aiken had a good race, Earl Bamber finished the race, and Frederick Vesti was very impressive in his stints. So, Kobe, although they didn't win the race, Action Express didn't. Did you see enough from them at this point after watching Sebring to feel confident in them potentially winning later in 2025?
Yeah, I believe at some point later this season we'll see Action Express win a race. I think it could potentially happen as soon as the next round in Long Beach, because Long Beach, Cadillacs are really good around there. But the last few years, it's been interesting with Action Express. I remember when they were always up front, always on the podium, and dominating these IMSA races and winning. And now all of a sudden, they've been going through a drought and really struggling in the last few years. They've been trying to rebuild this team and get it back to where it used to be. I don't think they're quite there yet. I think they're knocking on the door, though. And I believe that with the drivers they have now, they certainly have the talent and also the personnel to get the job done. So I feel really good about Action Express getting at least one win later on in the season. And you mentioned their drivers, Jack Aiken, he's the lead driver in that program now with Pippo Durrani, leaving at the end of last season to become a Genesis factory driver. That program's going to be coming on, in the next year or so. Yeah, and Jack Aiken's taken over that leadership role. Thought he did really good in the race. Earl Bamber as well. He's always been really fast, whether it's a GT car or a prototype. But the one driver I want to highlight is, unfortunately, he's just doing the endurance races. If they had an extra car, I feel like he should be running full-time is the young Frederick Vesti. There's a reason why he's one of the reserve drivers for Mercedes' Formula One program. Vesti was a highly rated driver on the road to F1 ladder program. Fortunately, it hasn't worked out yet for him in Formula One, but there's a reason why he's a reserve driver at Mercedes alongside Valtteri Bottas. If either Kimi Antonelli or George Russell aren't able to go, Frederick Vesti would be one of the drivers, who could potentially step in. And he really showed his pace. He was the fastest driver in this number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac prototype in the 12 Hours of Sebring. He just showed that he has the pace, and once you give him an opportunity, he's going to go out and perform. That's why I was actually a little surprised that Earl Bamber finished up the race. I thought Vesti should have been the one out there in the car, but they had him, second to last. And I guess, sometimes when they're mixing up the strategy, having the drivers in, especially when you're trying to balance the drive time, unfortunately it just doesn't always work out. But I was mostly impressed with what Frederick Vesti was able to do.
Well, let's take a look now at 2 more GTP teams. The experienced Wayne Taylor Racing and new to the GTP class, the Aston Martin Thor team. Starting with Wayne Taylor, both of their Cadillacs had a rough race. At the start of the race, the number 10 Cadillac was struggling, and Ricky Taylor got a penalty for contact with a GTD Ferrari, which ended the day for Triarzi Competizione after suffering heavy front-end damage. The number 10 team was basically playing catch-up for the remainder of the race and finished 7th overall, 1 lap down. Then the number 40 Cadillac with Brendan Hartley behind the wheel locked up and crashed head-on into the tire wall. The number 40 Cadillac then finished 11th in class, 8 laps down. The number 10 team now has finishes of 5th and 7th, with the number 40 picking up a pair of 11th place finishes to start off the year. Meanwhile, Aston Martin debuted its highly anticipated Valkyrie hypercar in IMSA, the first LMH car to compete in the GTP class. And despite many struggles from what we saw from them in the FIA World Endurance Championship season opener in Qatar, Ross Gunn, Roman DeAngelis, and Alex Riberas finished 9th overall, only 2 laps down. Kobe, what's more surprising to you, a rough start for Wayne Taylor or Aston Martin making it to the end of the 12 hours?
I gotta say, I'm mostly surprised by Aston Martin making it to the end of the 12 hours of Sebring, mostly because it's a brand new car. And while I say that car sounds absolutely fantastic, I'm really glad by the decision that IMSA made to have them take the mufflers off that thing and let it scream, give the fans what they want. And that's exactly what we got. Yeah, it's been a while since we've heard a prototype in sports car racing that has just sounded so good, like the Aston Martin Valkyrie hypercar here. And yeah, I was really interested to see how the first LMH platform car would compete against all the LMDHs that we've seen in the GTP class for the last few years. And not surprising at all, the car was in the Aston Martin. It was towards the back of actually at the back of the GTP class. We know it wasn't going to probably have the pace given how new it is, and for them to actually see the checkered flag instead of retiring from the race early, big surprise for me. But I'm sure they have to feel very happy. Although they didn't, probably get the finish that they probably would have wanted, I think that they have to be really proud with the progress that they made with this car in such a short amount of time and just finishing the race. This has to be a huge win for this Aston Martin Thor team in their factory prototype program. Really looking forward to seeing them unlock more speed over time and seeing how it goes on both sides of the Atlantic in the World Endurance Championship and the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. I think Aston Martin certainly have a lot to be proud of, and this is why you saw teams like Audi, and during the days of LMP1, this is why they would come and run like these long 24, 36-hour endurance tests at Sebring, because Sebring, given the abrasive surface, and they always say respect the bumps, given how bumpy this track is. You see some of the biggest teams in sports car racing come to Sebring to test their cars in endurance mode, because if something is wrong with your car, and it breaks, it will happen at Sebring. And for them to make it all 12 hours, and not really have any significant issue with this car, that's quite a testament to the car they built. And I'm going to give a quick note on Wayne Taylor Racing. It's been really strange for them lately, and all the struggles we've seen from them, because they've always been like Action Express, up there, towards the front, battling, competing for wins. But but for Wayne Taylor Racing, it's definitely been quite a struggle in the first 2 races for them. You mentioned their finish has been the number 10 is, they're basically been more average than anything, 5th and 7th, and then the number 40, Jordan Taylor, Louis Delatraz, they want to forget what's happened in the 36 hours of Florida. 2 11th place finishes is not something to be proud of.
Yeah, it seemed like for a few years there, you had Jeff Gordon getting in that car at Daytona, Fernando Alonso, guys like Scott Dixon. It seemed like, whoever was in that car basically had a free ticket to a Rolex. It seemed like they were winning, or at least in strong contention to win almost every year.
And Kobayashi.
Kobayashi, yeah, there you go. That's another one. So there's just been so many great drivers in that team, and they've been so strong, especially at Daytona over the last few seasons. So to see them struggle like this is certainly a big surprise, at least to me as a more casual IMSA viewer, to start 2025. But hopefully they can get that rough start turned around here as we get into the heart of the IMSA season. Now, let's take a quick look at the battle for the win in GTD. In the closing minutes of the race, we have a number 12 Vassar Sullivan Lexus and a number 57 Windward Racing Mercedes fighting for the class victory. Jack Hawksworth was leading in the Vassar Sullivan Lexus until Windward's Philip Ellis gave Hawksworth a bump and run, moving him out of the way and putting the number 57 Mercedes into the lead. Ellis never looked back, and that gave Windward Racing and co-drivers Russell Ward and Indy Donch back-to-back GTD class victories in the 12 hours of Sebring. So, Kobe, what did you make on the move that Ellis made on Hawksworth to win the race?
Well, it was obviously very, very aggressive, right? And I know in sports car racing, it's typically frowned upon to race like this. Well, I'll just say in like championships like the World Endurance Championship, European Le Mans Series, Asian Le Mans Series, or like GT World Challenge Europe, those series, basically the more European-based racing series. But as we see, based on the officiating, you see an IMSA compared to how the ACO officiate races, much different. If you do something like that in an ACO sanctioned race, that probably would have been a penalty there on the Windward Racing Mercedes. But in IMSA, they kind of let them race more elbows out, a little contact here and there, but you're obviously not gonna spin someone out, and get away with it. as we saw happen with Ricky Taylor in the number 10. They end up taking out the Triarsi Competizione Ferrari, and Ricky Taylor ended up getting a penalty there for that incident. And Wayne Taylor was not happy on the pit box. He gave a very fiery interview saying it shouldn't have been penalized. And I think every time you see a mic on Wayne Taylor's face in a moment like that, you're definitely going to get a memorable quote from him, because he's a fiery guy. But getting back to what we're talking about right now, at least he didn't crash him, right? I felt like that's probably not a move that you want to be on the receiving end of. I understand why Jack Hawksworth was really upset over that, but at the same time, it wasn't anything that was overly egregious. It's not like Philip Ellis got behind the Lexus and just completely took him out. He basically just used like your Saturday night short track, move that you see on a stock car. He literally just moved him out of the way and went by. And Hawksworth, he had a chance to try to get him back, but he didn't. He wasn't able to get up there. And I read about this story on Sports Car 365 as well, and saw the quotes that Jack Hawksworth gave them. And I'm reading it right now, and he says that we told Sports Car 365, I don't mind hip and shoulder, but he ran into the back of me and moved out of the way. And he say, so look, he's got one coming. And then Philip Ellis went up and he followed up and quoted, saying that I wouldn't be happy if I lost first place either. I understand that he's not super happy. And he said, to be honest, I just gave him back what he gave me a couple laps beforehand. And he says that he has a lot of respect for Jack Hawksworth as a driver, and he's a great guy. And he said, but that's how he races as well. And he said, you reap what you sow. So I guess we'll just leave it at that.
All right, that's going to be very interesting to follow here as we continue on with the season. Now, looking at the other class winners, the number 43 Inter-Europol Competition Prototype 1 LMP2 with Tom Dillman, Bijoy Garg, and Jeremy Clark. And then in GTD Pro, the number 77 AO Racing Porsche, that's the Rexy car of Lauren Heinrich, Klaus Bachler, and Alessio Picariello took the win over there. So IMSA returns to action on April 12th for the Acura Grand Prix of Long Beach. And of course, we'll have more coverage for you right here on the Grid Network when we get to that date. In the meantime, we move on now to Supercars. It was the second race weekend of the year for the Repco Supercars Championship. 4 races were scheduled for the Albert Park circuit on Australian Grand Prix weekend, but as we mentioned briefly in the F1 segment, we had torrential weather impact the race weekend. So we only saw 3 races. The 4th was canceled due to those treacherous wet track conditions. 2 of the 3 races were won by Triple Eight Racing's Red Bull Ampol Racing, or Triple Eight's Red Bull Ampol Racing rather. Brock Feeney took race 1, and then Will Brown was victorious in race 3. After the Grand Prix races, defending champion Brown leads the championship standings by 7 points over Cam Waters, and Feeney is in third, 49 points back. So let's welcome Tanner back into the show. Tanner, good to see you again. We'll start with you here. After Cam Waters and Tickford Racing swept the opening round in Sydney, did Triple H show that it won't be easy to dethrone them as the top dogs in supercars?
Absolutely. And they were able to prove it by putting Feeney on the pole, I believe, for all 3 events, if I'm not mistaken. The guy had a tremendous weekend. It's just unfortunate that in races 2 and 3, he failed to get off the line and get into turn 1 first. So, yeah, I really think that the Triple Eight team had a phenomenal race weekend. And, obviously, Waters, though he had a fantastic opening weekend in Sydney not too long ago, we did mention coming into this past weekend that Waters would probably have a tougher time going through and getting a good result, considering that the Ford wasn't as strong at Albert Park, and that kind of played out pretty much as we said. And I think that in order for Tickford to really hammer in and become a true championship threat, you got to shore up that qualifying effort. They did not put together a single good lap the entire weekend until race 4, and then that race got canceled. So it was a really unfortunate weekend for them, but I will say, for being buried so far in the pack, Cam Waters made the most of every minor inconvenience that every driver in front of him had, and was able to weasel his way into top 10s in all 3 races. And you've really got to be impressed by that. It shows to me that Waters has the mettle to become a championship driver in this series. And I think with everything considered, we're kind of at a wash over the first 2 weeks. Obviously, obviously the Triple Eight cars had a lot of speed in Sydney as well. So yeah, I definitely think that Triple Eight has a definite advantage over Tickford right now, but at the same time, you've got to tip your cap to Cam Waters and that team. They were able to really fight through adversity this weekend, and I think they may have had a chance to win race 4 had it been able to happen, but you can't really argue with results of, top 10s when you started pretty much outside the top 20 in practically every race. So hats off to Triple Eight. They had a great weekend, but we've got many, many race weekends left to go, and it's really impossible to tell who's going to be strong come towards the end of the season. So I'm unsure as to who's actually stronger, but Cam Waters definitely showed that he is able to fight through as much adversity necessary to get a good result, and that to me is really indicative of somebody that's a championship caliber driver.
Yeah, and I think Cam Waters and that number 6 Monster Energy 4 team did the best they could to salvage the weekend. Yeah, they would like to finish a few spots higher in those 3 races, but they did the best that they could given the situation. And also a good point, Tanner, on qualifying, that, in supercars in general, qualifying is very important because once they get spread out, it's super hard to pass in these cars, given the way the aero is. And if you qualify in the back, it's going to be an uphill battle to try to make it to the front. It's not impossible if you have a really good car, but it just makes it that much harder. And given how short these races were this weekend at Albert Park, if you qualify in the back, you're already starting off on the back foot, and it was going to be really hard to make something out of it. But I guess we can say Cam Waters made something out of nothing, end up getting some good points and, able to go to the next round in a much better place, because it could definitely be worse. But at the end of the day, we already knew Triple Eight was going to be hard to knock off. And after Cam Waters and Tickford swept the first weekend in Sydney, we figured Triple Eight would come back. And our own Matt White even said that, he would probably not bank on Cam Waters, being as strong this weekend, because the Grand Prix circuit at Albert Park has not traditionally been a track where Ford runs really well. It has traditionally been a General Motors type track, and that's exactly what we saw this weekend with all 3 race winners driving Chevrolet Camaros. And moving forward throughout the rest of the season, I think Tickford is definitely have to step up his game if they want to run with Brock Feeney and Will Brown throughout the rest of the season with Cam Waters and be in this championship fight all the way down to the grand final. That's what they're calling it down in Adelaide this year, because we haven't really talked about it much, but Supercars, this is their first year debuting a playoff system. We'll see how it goes.
Kobe, you just had to remind me there, didn't you?
You didn't have to bring that up.
I had my mind taken off of that the off season, but
I decided to bring that up because you're here, Ben. I had to remind you all the good stuff.
I appreciate that. Well, given the format of Grand Prix races, sometimes we get surprise results you wouldn't see during a traditional Supercars race weekend with longer races. Of course, in Melbourne, it's full-on sprint racing, no worries about saving fuel or tires, all-out battles going for the win. Kobe, like you mentioned, qualifying being very important. One of the biggest surprises was Matt Stone Racing. Cam Hill got 2 podiums, one of those being his first career Supercars win in race 2. Hill's teammate Nick Percat he also got 2 podiums and really had to earn the podium in race 3 after his power steering failed on the final lap. So, Kobe, I'll go to you first for this one. Were you surprised to see the Matt Stone Racing drivers mix it up with Triple Eight? And was this just a one-off showing from them given the format, or do you think that this can continue as the season goes on?
Well, I'll say this. I think the Matt Stone Racing drivers, I think, on some weekends they can probably contend for a top 10 finish or even slightly better than that. But honestly, the performance we saw from them, I think it's probably just going to be a one-off, because heading into the Grand Prix race weekend at Albert Park, I've said this on this show times before, that because of how quickly, the qualifying sessions and practice goes down, all you have to do is just get a really good lap, and some of your top drivers in supercars, they may not get the best lap, and then they're stuck towards the back. I think given this format, that it really helps some of these smaller teams on the grid, or teams who don't have the funding of a Tickford or a Triple Eight. I think it helps them out, this format where you don't have to worry about saving tires or fuel. You can just go out there and race. I think if there was a bit of strategy involved and this was a longer race, I hate to say it, but I think Cam Hill and Nick Percat would not have finished as high as they did. But I don't want to take this away from them. It was a spectacular race weekend for this team, especially Cam Hill, to get his first Supercars win. And looking at all our choices for pick a winner this weekend in Albert Park, not a single person chose Cam Hill to win this race. And to be honest, I don't know why anyone would have. But his credit, he ended up doing what he needed to do, get the win. Now he's a winner in the Repco Supercars Championship, and that's just spectacular for him. Because he's worked really hard to get this opportunity and come out here and show what he can do. And this is a day that Cam Hill will never forget. And Nick Percat, and in that last race, what a gutsy drive. I remember watching the final lap and seeing the smoke coming from his car and thinking, oh man, Nick Percat's had a great race and he's going to lose it right here at the end. But as the power steering was going out, he really muscled that thing and fought really hard to end up getting another podium result. So kudos to Nick Percat for not giving up at all on that one. I honestly thought it was an engine failure when I saw the smoke, but he persevered, got the job done. I think overall, Matt Stone Racing has to be very proud without a weekend win. I just think that this is probably just a one-off showing, but I'd love to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I think it's a little too early in the season to really say if it's going to be this like grand transformation for Matt Stone Racing, but you have to be, very impressed with the results that we saw. They had speed all weekend. They put their cars into the top 6, I believe, every single race for qualifying, and they had strong results the entire weekend. And I feel like, they're definitely not a team that you normally see up close to the front of the grid, but at the same time, sometimes you hit on a setup really well, and we see this often in NASCAR. You hit a setup really well and you can go out and win a race. And it seems to me that that's exactly what happened in Melbourne this weekend with Cam Hill. And that's not to throw shade of any kind at that race team. It's just that they aren't one of the traditional powerhouses of supercars. So it was really nice to see a team that's not really renowned for having, a real winning reputation, make their way to the front of the grid for a whole race weekend and contend throughout each race. And not only that, to nab one. And for Cam Hill to, come out and get his first win, he's the same age as me at 28. So it was really cool to see a guy that's, obviously been trying his whole career to reach this moment, get out there and win his first race. And I think that it may not be a beacon for the rest of the season of how they'll perform and continue to perform throughout, but you have to be happy with the result if you're MSR. They obviously haven't had this kind of speed traditionally, but maybe it's the start of something new for them, and you got to keep their eye on them going forward, especially at tracks that have similar properties probably to Albert Park. So I wouldn't rule them out of future contention throughout the rest of the season. I feel like if you find that sweet spot once in the season, you could probably find it again. But I think that with all the unique circumstances that come with this weekend, where every race was 19 laps or shortened to a time distance, you have to kind of take that into account with everything that happened. And, when races come down to saving tires or, making sure that, all of your equipment is maintained throughout a whole event, that may be where they kind of come into more trouble. But again, you really have to, come out of this weekend if you're MSR and just think that this is just something to build upon going throughout the rest of the year. And hopefully they can translate this kind of performance into stronger performances going forward. But again, this weekend's kind of unique in regards to the rest of the schedule. So it's impossible to tell, but it would be nice to see another team kind of like really make a stride and start making a name for themselves with the, Triple Eights and the Dick Johnson Racings of the world.
Well, in the 3 races that happened as scheduled, we saw lots of hard, aggressive racing and lots of contact, especially in race 1. Jack LeBrock suffered heavy damage in a crash. Richie Stanaway spun out. David Reynolds got knocked around, and lots of other contact was happening all throughout the weekend. This further raises the questions of driving standards in the series and how far the limits can be pushed without getting a penalty for avoidable contact or aggressive driving. Will Brown said on the Supercars website that everyone is getting their elbows out a bit more and just letting everyone know. Tanner, I know we had this discussion on Encore last week about what we saw in the Xfinity Series. What are you thinking of the driving standards right now in Supercars, and specifically what you saw this weekend in the on-track action in Melbourne?
So, if memory serves, the other driver in the LeBrock incident did get a penalty. Am I correct about that? I believe they received some form of a time penalty after the caution was over. So, I mean, even when the racing is getting a little too much, there are still penalties being levied to the competition when they obviously get out of hand. So, in that regard, I can't really say that the racing was a little over aggressive or anything like that. I know that Shane Van Gisbergen, from his time in the Xfinity series and now the NASCAR Cup series, he has been, kind of getting used to the ability to get your elbows out. It seems that in years past, the Supercar series was a little bit more gentlemanly and didn't feature as much bumping and banging as you would see on a Sunday in America. With that said, it definitely feels like there's a bit of a break from that tradition that SVG is used to over in that area of the world. But at the same time, I'm not going to lie, I was extremely entertained in all three races. And I think that the drivers being able to have a little bit of liberty with their fenders and their side skirts is only going to help the competition and kind of increase any sort of animosity between competitors. So if I was the one running supercars right now, I don't think I'd have a problem with it. It seems like the fans and the drivers all kind of are already up to speed on this relaxing of driving standards, and I don't really have a problem with it as a viewer. But again, I'm not really a veteran to this series, and my discipline background is more in NASCAR, so I may be the exact wrong person to ask about this. But I will say I was very impressed by this weekend of racing action for supercars. I know that since the implementation of this third generation car, that passing hasn't exactly been easy to come by, and having the drivers, get a little bit more argy-bargy, as it were, is definitely leading to an increase in passing and an increase in drivers getting a little bit more spirited at one another. And I can't really imagine that's a bad thing. So I haven't seen anything too egregious that hasn't been penalized. So until I see something egregious that isn't penalized, I'm going to keep quiet and continue enjoying the show.
Yeah, and that's where we are nowadays. It's a show, right? Yeah, entertainment, because that's what we're focused on right now in so many series across motorsports. And Tanner, I also want to confirm that you're right. I just looked it up on the Supercars website, and the driver in that incident with Jack LeBrot did get a penalty. It was Ryan Wood from Walkinshaw Andretti United, and Jack LeBrot was very frustrated. He said, I think he's talking about the Supercars series in general. He said, I think we need to have a good hard look at ourselves and clean up our act. And I was reading comments from some of the drivers about all the hard, aggressive racing that we saw throughout the weekend. And it's come to my understanding that the race directors are basically having their boys have at it moment, but not too hard. Basically, that in years past, even if you did like rub someone, knock them off course, there was going to be a penalty. And based on how I understand how it's going to be officiated, now that's no longer going to be a penalty. You're not gonna be allowed to just go into the final corner on the final lap and just clean someone out and dump them, because that will still get you a penalty. But they're gonna basically have rubbing is racing in supercars more often, as Will Brown said, just getting their elbows out. And Will Brown also said that he believes that some of the drivers could be really angry based on the new driver standard. There could be a form of retaliation, but not in a way of just intentionally crashing somebody. There'll be other ways for drivers to retaliate. But yeah, definitely seems like in the last few years, I've been watching supercars for a handful of seasons now, and I've noticed that the difference in the driving standards. When I first started watching, like you said, it was more of a gentleman-like thing, where you did see some hard racing, but you didn't really see as much contact. But now, as you saw in that first race, that was a lot of beating and banging, drivers going around getting knocked off course. It was just extremely, extremely aggressive. But it looks like that this is the new precedent now. What we're going to see in supercars, I think because of the Grand Prix format being a short race, this is probably up the aggression a lot. But I think in some of these longer races, when strategy coming into play, especially when you get to Bathurst 1000, and some of the other races down the stretch, you're probably not going to see this type of behavior from the driver, especially so early on in the races. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes moving forward and seeing like what these drivers are willing to do, since it seems like that the race directors the stewards are going to, be like, we're going to let you guys have at it, and we don't want you intentionally crashing somebody, but if you're going to rub someone, get by them, just go for it.
Come back to the wrap-up show. I can't get away from playoffs or entertainment coming up in our conversations. That's just how it goes, I guess. But Supercars will return to action on April 11th through 13th for a trip to New Zealand and Taupo Super 440. So we'll keep our eye on that. In the meantime, Kobe, we've got one more series to recap. Let's hear about what happened this weekend in MotoGP.
Yeah, one more on this very busy racing weekend. Marc Marquez entered the Argentine Grand Prix on a 3-race winning streak. He swept the opening weekend in Thailand, winning the pole sprint racing Grand Prix, and the dominance continued in Argentina with Marc Marquez completing the Grand Slam again with the pole fastest lap. He got the sprint race win yesterday, and then the Grand Prix victory today. And for the second consecutive race, it was a 1-2 finish for the Marquez brothers, with Marc in first and Alex Marquez finishing second. And taking the final spot on the podium for the first time in 4 years, Franco Morbidelli got his first podium in 1,414 days, holding off fourth-place finisher and two-time defending MotoGP world champion Pecco Bagnaia. And after Thailand and Argentina, Marc leads brother Alex by 16 points in the rider standings, and Bagnaia is 31 points back. And talk about dream starts. I know we talked about the dream start that Porsche Penske Motorsports had in IMSA, but let's talk about the dream start that Marc Marquez has had in this first season as a Ducati factory rider, and also his brother Alex Marquez as well. And I think if we had a roundtable to preview the 2025 MotoGP World Championship season, we probably would have said, yeah, Marc Marquez probably would be leading the driver standings or at least second. But I don't think many people would have predicted to see Alex Marquez second in the championship after 2 race weekends, and then to finish right behind his highly accomplished brother. I think that's just spectacular, and shows you how much Alex has improved as a rider. I know we always like to talk about Marc Marquez being the gold standard in MotoGP and all of that, but his brother Alex, he's just improved so much. I remember when he first came into MotoGP, you really saw nothing spectacular from him. And then last season, saw some improvements as well. But Alex has been on a completely different level after the first 2 races. It'll be interesting to see if he's going to continue this throughout the rest of the season. But it's definitely really, really crazy seeing Marc and Alex, the Marquez brothers, up there 1-2 in the races, and then in the championship standings as well. And it would be really cool if both brothers end up going against each other for the championship. And given how Marc Marquez is performing to start off this MotoGP season, it's going to be interesting to watch Pecco Bagnaia as well, because for the longest time, he's been that number 1 rider at Ducati, and it seems like Pecco Bagnaia was the standard, and then you had your number 2 rider beside him. And based on how Marc Marquez is performing, Pecco Bagnaia might become the number 2 rider with the Ducati factory team. He was very frustrated after the race today, understandably so, especially when you've been in the position that Marc Marquez is currently in. And then you said that he's going out there and getting the most out of the bike, and Pecco is still searching for more. And I wonder how their dynamic is going to go as the season goes on. So there's definitely a lot to follow in the MotoGP world here in 2025. And once again, Ducati is looking like the bike to beat, sweeping the first 2 race weekends, although we saw Honda's Johan Zarco and Juan Mir finish 6th and 10th respectively in the Grand Prix. KTM's Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta were 7th and 9th, while Trackhouse Aprilia's Ayogura finished 8th. The next MotoGP race is on March 30th at Circuit of the Americas, a track where Marc Marquez could continue his winning ways. After all, his nickname is the King of Coda, and I'm sure Pecco Bagnaia is probably not happy to see Coda coming up, since Marc Marquez is usually the one rider to beat, and when we get to Coda. And now we're going to bring everyone back on for our Grid 1 shining moment from this racing weekend. We had a whole lot to choose from, and let us know in the chat below if you're watching live or on replay later, what's the one thing that you really like from this racing weekend across all the different series we saw racing. And Tanner, I want to throw it over to you. What was your Grid 1 shining moment?
As much focus has been placed on Josh Berry, and deservedly so, I think that second place finisher in the Cup Series, Daniel Suarez, should be given a little bit more of a shining moment this week. he obviously had that unfortunate collision while he was running in 6th last week at Phoenix with Catherine Legg after she clipped Josh Berry coincidentally last weekend at Phoenix. And, Suarez has, had to field a lot of questions this week that I'm sure he didn't really want to answer or talk about, but he really put his head down this weekend and performed when it mattered most. He obviously didn't have the greatest qualifying run and had to really fight to get his way up to the front. But once he got there, he didn't fall backwards, which is really impressive because we haven't really seen in the last really 2.5 years, like Trackhouse have any speed, especially at these 1.5 miles. Obviously, you had the outlier last year with Ross coming through and winning at Kansas, but overall, the Trackhouse cars, like we mentioned earlier, haven't had a top 5 together since 2023, I believe. So it's been quite some time for them to really have this kind of performance, especially out of the 99 camp at 1.5 miles. So I wanted to shine a light on NASCAR's lone Mexican driver. He's in a contract year, and performances like these kind of recertify that you are definitely a cup caliber talent. And I think that a lot of people have been coming for his job because obviously Connor Zilic looks like the next best thing to come through with stock car racing. And while you can't really fault them for that, it's impossible to ignore that there is a driver still in that car right now, and he is logging some very impressive performances. He's just not really had the results this year to really show that he is worthy of staying in Cup. So I hope for Daniel Suarez's sake that this is the beginning of a turning point for his season where he's starting to really string these finishes together and he can kind of recoup that form that he showed in 2022 when he landed a top 10 points finish.
I want to give a call to another driver in the top 10 in today's Cup Series race, and that's AJ Allmendinger. He ran very strong all day with that Kaulig car up in the top 10. I think that might be a sign that maybe this team is starting to trend in the right direction. I still don't expect them to run in the top 10 on 1.5 miles every week, but a great day nonetheless. Battling Kyle Larson for position of closing laps at a track he's so good at has to feel good, and especially for AJ on a weekend, or a week rather, where he was inducted in the West Coast Stock Car Hall of Fame. Great way to cap off his week with an 8th place finish. That's my one shining moment from this week.
Yeah, my shining moment, got to give a call to Anthony Hamilton. That was what he did for Isaac Hadjar, and one of the worst moments of his young racing career. That was, just so wonderful to see. We know the environment that Formula One is cutthroat. It can be very nasty at times business-wise, and you're under a microscope 24/7 at the racetrack. And Isaac Hadjar, imagine this: you're this young driver. You were a little kid watching F1 races on TV. In his case, watching Lewis Hamilton, who I learned in just the last few days that Lewis Hamilton is his racing hero. If you haven't seen it on Formula One social media channel, they got the rookies together, to they asked them questions, and they were asking who were some of your heroes growing up, and Ollie Behrman, end up pointing at Isaac Hadjar, and he said Lewis Hamilton with him. And then they were talking about how when they had the FP1 session together, and how Isaac said when Lewis, goes by, I'm going to wave at him and all that. And then there's this picture circulating online of a young Isaac Hadjar taking a picture with Lewis Hamilton, and here in Australia, they recreated that photo many years later. So he's a huge Lewis Hamilton fan, and for Lewis Hamilton's father, Anthony, to console him in this moment, thought it was a really special moment. And then when they asked Anthony why he decided to do this for Isaac Hadjar, he was basically saying, that I'm a dad, and it felt like, this is a moment where he had to be a dad. Although Isaac Hadjar is, not his child and all of that, he felt like he had to be there, at that moment. And I'm really glad that Anthony was there for Isaac, remind him that it's okay, that unfortunately this stuff happens and you can move forward the next race weekend. I think this world, we, especially in Formula One, we need more Anthony Hamiltons and less Helmut Marcos.
I was just going to say, in a world of Helmut Marcos being Anthony Hamilton, I think that's a great message to leave our show here tonight. So thank you, Kobe, for that, and Tanner for your shining moment as well. And taking a look at our upcoming schedule here on the Grid Network, Brandon and I will be back tomorrow for Grid Encore. Josh Birch may be stopping by as well, whether that's live or through pre-recorded notes to recap the F3 and F2 weekends. So make sure you stay tuned for that tomorrow. And then Wednesday, Kobe, you'll be back, I know, on Grid Tonight with Josh again and Matt White. And then Thursday, we have our new NASCAR pre-race show format continuing, so don't miss that show as we approach Homestead, Miami. Saturday, our F1 race preview with the Chinese Grand Prix coming up. Also, be sure to check out our latest episode of Women in Motorsport. We recapped Haley Deegan and Sophia Flourish's Indy Next debuts, looked ahead to the 2025 F1 Academy season, and I kind of gave my last word, if you will, on Catherine Legg's Cup debut and the surrounding conversation regarding approval for NASCAR Cup Series competition. So definitely make sure you check that one out as well. And if you liked what you saw tonight, again, thank you all for sticking with us through over an hour and a half. I know we had a lot of racing to get to, but if you want to support the show, support this channel here, you can consider joining these fine individuals, Colin Deschelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew, in investing in the Grid Network, helping keep us on the air and continuing to grow this motorsports media outlet throughout 2025 and beyond. Or if you'd rather make a one-time contribution instead, you can visit the Buy Me a Coffee link just in the description box below, rather. Or if you're watching on YouTube, we now have the Super Chat and Super Thanks features enabled as well. And again, you can follow us at Grid Network TV on all social media. So make sure you do that and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For Tanner Smith and Kobe Lambeth, I'm Ben Schneider. I will see you tomorrow for Grid Encore. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you all for tuning in tonight.